Hey kids, how you doing this evening? Um, Now, as we get into our next article that we're going to be reading, this one really this is about something called prohibition, and prohibition really is something that probably the 20s were all about, maybe more than any other single issue, and that was the 18th Amendment, which made buying, selling, or manufacturing alcohol illegal. And in a place like Chicago, there was very little support for the idea of prohibition. And yet, as much as maybe 85% of people were against it. And anytime you have a law that is that unpopular, it's going to be really hard to enforce because pretty much nobody is taking it seriously. And that was definitely the case in Chicago. Chicago wasn't the only place that felt that way about it, but Chicago was definitely a symbol throughout the country and the entire world of people pretty much just saying, no, not doing prohibition. That's just not it. So we're going to see kind of the way the law got enacted, as well as kind of ways that people got around the law, and we'll continue that on into our future articles that we're doing. Here's where we're going to start. Okay, this article is entitled "Chicago Wetter Than the Atlantic Ocean: The Temperance Movement." The struggle to ban alcohol in the United States went far back into the 1800s. It became the top social cause in the USA after slavery ended in the 1860s. Organizations such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League pointed out the dangerous effects of alcohol abuse on the American family and society. The Dries, people who wanted to ban alcohol, were led mostly by women, who converted the tactics they used successfully against slavery to their fight to get rid of alcohol in the United States. Most people agreed with the fact that drinking alcohol was, at best, not a healthy thing to do and potentially dangerous at worst. However, wets, people who were against banning alcohol, argued that it was almost impossible to enforce a ban on alcohol. After all, liquor is a natural product. It can be made from corn, wheat, grapes, oranges, or virtually any other grain or fruit that grows on American soil. The process of making an alcoholic drink is a natural process called fermentation, which anyone with a little bit of time and a basic knowledge of chemistry can do. Making alcohol illegal is one thing, but actually stopping people from making and drinking the stuff would be much more difficult. The Dries started to get the upper hand in their fight when the USA entered World War I. Many Americans knew they would have to sacrifice things they usually enjoyed to help the USA win the war. While alcohol was not really one of those things, the spirit of sacrifice and making a better world was on people's minds at the time, and more people began to support prohibition. The Dries were very organized and very loud, and seemed as if they had most of the people on their side. In reality, the Dries were always a minority in the United States, but their ability to organize to elect politicians supportive of prohibition made up for their lack of numbers. One by one, state legislatures approved a proposed amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would make alcohol illegal. When Nebraska became the 36th state to ratify the amendment, it became a law, which took effect in January 1920. Dries celebrated what they hoped would be an end to the evils of alcohol abuse. Organized crime also celebrated because they knew the liquor business was now theirs. On a boat, it's bootlegging. On Lakeshore Drive, it's hospitality. Within hours of prohibition beginning in Chicago, criminals began bootlegging liquor into the city. In fact, Chicago became the first place in America to have a prohibition violation, as several men were arrested trying to steal barrels of industrial alcohol only 4 hours after the ban went into effect. Far more intelligent criminals had already determined how they would make money off of illegal alcohol by the time prohibition started. Men who were already involved in gambling and prostitution rackets easily moved into the bootlegging business. They first bought ownership in saloons and breweries. Many breweries made a show of converting to producing ice cream because the machinery needed to brew beer and make ice cream is roughly the same, but in reality never stopped brewing beer. Saloons turned into pharmacies, where alcohol prescribed by doctors could be purchased. Suddenly, doctors began prescribing whiskey for just about any common sickness. Those that were not converted into drugstores became speakeasies or illegal bars. Then they made contact with liquor distributors outside the United States. Chicago tended to get a lot of Canadian whiskey since it is only a day's drive to the Canadian border. Other places in America got their liquor from other locations closer to them. For instance, Miami bootleggers smuggled in rum made from sugarcane from Cuba, only 90 miles away. Rich customers even paid for high-end liquor to be bootlegged in from faraway England and France. In fact, the famous Scotch whiskey Cutty Sark was created specifically to be shipped to the USA and was not even available in the United Kingdom. Cutty Sark still exists today with a label showing a sailboat, probably much like the ones that bootlegged it into the USA in the 1920s. Some customers could afford to buy real liquor imported from other countries like Cutty Sark. Usually, though, drinks that were far too expensive for a normal person to afford. They typically turn to local sources for their alcohol. Bathtub gin is homemade liquor, often literally made in the bathtub, which tasted roughly like gin because the pine flavor of gin was easily copied and could be added to the fiery mix to make it at least drinkable, if not enjoyable. Even lower quality liquor known as rotgut was made. In the country, this liquor was known as moonshine. In the cities, it was simply known as alky. Those who made it in small apartment alcohol stills were called alky cookers. And there we see a picture from a movie way back in the 1930s called The Roaring Twenties. Guys making bathtub gin, literally making it in the bathtub, pouring it into bottles. While making alcohol was not a particularly difficult process, it is potentially dangerous. Many people did not realize that some alcohol is poisonous for humans to consume. They simply did not know they were convinced that they would be safe if they drank it through a towel. Drinking unsafe liquor often caused a nervous disorder known as Jake leg. Since so much of the cheap liquor came from unknown or homemade sources, many did not have any idea that they were drinking rotgut until it was too late. Sometimes bootleggers would put rotgut in an empty bottle of expensive liquor, hoping to sell it at a higher price. They would then disappear before the customer found out about it. So even high-end customers sometimes were fooled into drinking rotgut. Sometimes the bootleggers found innovative ways to create alcoholic drinks. Grape orchards were used for years to make wine. Of course, Prohibition, wine was illegal. So the winemakers, known as vintners, created grape bricks that could be shipped anywhere in the country and would not spoil. They could be dissolved in water to make grape juice. Of course, they also contain the warning. After dissolving the brick in a gallon of water, do not place the liquid in a jug away in the cupboard for 20 days, because then it would turn into wine. The wine was terrible tasting, but it would not make the drinker go blind or give him Jake leg. After a few years of prohibition, non-alcoholic beer began to be produced. Known as near beer, it was legal because it was supposedly not intoxicating. Of course, by needling the barrel with pure alcohol, its alcohol content could be brought back to normal beer's usual 6%. The G-Men. The government's attempts to enforce prohibition were doomed from the start. The federal government had 5,000 prohibition agents for the entire USA. Only 80 agents were responsible for the estimated 15,000 speakeasies in Chicago, the Chicago area, Northwest Indiana, and southern Wisconsin that the government, or G-Men, were responsible to handle. Most found their jobs almost impossible to do. They had too much territory to cover, often dealt with politicians and local cops who were wets and had no real incentive to help them, and found it easy to accept the bribes that criminals gave them to ignore the bootlegging that they probably could not catch anyway. So, with very little local support and an enormous amount of liquor to deal with, the G-Men were much less successful at enforcing prohibition than anybody ever thought. A prohibition agent named Eliot Ness wrote a book years later called The Untouchables that was eventually turned into a TV show and a movie. It detailed an elite unit of prohibition agents in their quest to bring down Chicago bootlegger Al Capone. The tales were exaggerated. The unit did exist and did have some successes raiding breweries and speakeasies, but in no way did they bring down Capone. At best, they inconvenienced him and cost him some money, replacing confiscated liquor. And there you see a movie poster from the movie The Untouchables. Entertaining movie, if not especially historically accurate. Get an opportunity to see it. It's worth seeing. I just wouldn't put anything in a paper that you might be writing about the era from that movie. So there you go. That's the beginning of Prohibition. We'll get further into kind of how things went in the city of Chicago from there.